When you open history books or look at paintings by Western artists, how is the Ottoman harem portrayed to you? Hundreds of women leisurely enjoying baths all day. Their only goal to catch the Sultan's eye. A mystical palace of pleasure? Or a dark nest of intrigue, poisoned drinks, and strangled princes? Forget what you think you know. Because the real harem was far more complex, far more disciplined, and trust me, far more impressive. It was not just a residence. It was an administrative center run by the empire's most powerful women, one of the strictest educational institutions in the world, and a production hub of the Ottoman aristocracy. Today, we are unlocking the doors of the Durasit, the House of Happiness. How were the concubines selected? How did they actually meet the Sultan? And most importantly, how did they manage an entire empire from behind these four walls? Welcome. The word harem comes from Arabic, meaning forbidden, untouchable, or sacred. In other words, it was a completely private space, sealed off from outside eyes, a domain of the dynasty's most intimate affairs. During the reign of Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, Topkapi Palace was already the administrative center of the empire, but the harem wasn't originally located there. It was during Suleiman the Magnificent's era, under the influence of the famous harem sultan, that the harem was moved into the heart of the state, Topkapi Palace itself. This relocation laid the foundation for the Sultanate of Women, a transformative period in Ottoman history. Inside the palace runs a stone corridor called the Altinol, the Golden Road. It stretches from the concubines' quarters all the way to the Sultan's private chambers. You've probably heard the legends about its name. They say sultans scattered gold along it during holidays. But its real significance was that it was the road to power. Walking down this corridor meant that an ordinary slave girl could rise to the very top of the empire. But entering the harem was not easy. The main gate, called the Kumul Kapizi, was guarded 24/7 by the eunuchs. No one could slip inside, and no man from the outside was allowed in. So, who were the women behind these walls, and where did they come from? Almost all the women in the harem were non-Muslims, brought from outside the empire as part of the cult system. Why? Because the Sultan didn't want to marry girls from local Turkish families and risk sharing his power with other noble houses. He needed a wife who would be completely loyal only to him, disconnected from her roots. Over the centuries, the sources of these girls changed. In the early period, they came as war captives from the Balkans and interior Europe, like Harem Sultan. But as conquest slowed, by the 17th century, the focus shifted to the Caucasus. Circassian, Georgian, and Abaza girls became ideal concubines due to their beauty and adaptability to palace etiquette. These girls entered the palace either as spoils of war, gifts from the Crimean Khanate, or purchased from the slave markets of Istanbul. But not every beautiful girl on the street was admitted. They had to pass rigorous physical and intelligence tests. They needed to be flawless, because they would either give birth to the future rulers or marry the empire's high officials. Here's where the biggest misconception begins. The harem wasn't a place where women spent all day lounging and waiting for the Sultan. It was the female branch of the Enderun school, a serious academy. A girl entering the palace was called an Assami novice. She first learned Islam, then took Turkish literacy lessons. At that time, the harem had the highest female literacy in the empire. Music, literature, sewing, and embroidery, and most importantly, palace etiquette were taught. How to walk, how to speak, how to stand before the Sultan. Every detail was a lesson. The harem had a strict military-like discipline and hierarchy. At the bottom of the pyramid were the asmis and concubines. The talented ones would rise to become Kalfa and Usta, professional administrators with no intimate relation to the Sultan, running the harem's day-to-day affairs. For example, the Hazaniter Usta managed the harem's finances and held the official seal. At the top of the pyramid sat the Sultan's mother, the Valide Sultan. She was the absolute ruler of the harem. Even the Sultan would button his jacket only in her presence. The Valide Sultan controlled the harem's order, discipline, and even decided who could enter her son's private chambers. Now, let's get to the topic everyone's curious about, sexuality. Those movie scenes where the Sultan enters the harem and points at a line of girls, saying, "You, come here." Completely fictional. History was far more structured. A concubine being with the Sultan, known as Halvet, wasn't a random event. It was a planned state matter. Usually, the Valide Sultan or the chief of the girls selected a girl according to the Sultan's taste and the current political balance, then presented her to the Sultan. The chosen concubine would first be bathed and perfumed, then adorned. She would then walk down the famous Altignol, escorted by eunuchs, to the Sultan's chambers. Upon entering, out of respect, she had to kiss the floor covering before approaching the bed. The purpose wasn't merely pleasure. It was the continuity of the dynasty, meaning children. But even here, there was balance. Too many princes meant future succession conflicts and civil wars. That's why the palace knew and practiced birth control methods. Midwives and female physicians used herbal mixtures to prevent unwanted pregnancies. If a concubine bore a child for the Sultan, her status changed instantly. She was no longer a simple slave. She became a Kadin Effendi or Hasiki Sultan. She gained her own chambers, attendants, and stipend. So what about those who didn't catch the Sultan's eye? Were they imprisoned in the harem for life? No. The harem also functioned as a kind of marriage bureau. After a certain period, usually about 9 years of service, the concubines were released in a ceremony called Sirag Sikma. The palace would prepare a dowry for these girls, provide them with a home. And do you know whom they married? High-ranking state officials, pashas and viziers. This was a brilliant strategy. By marrying a woman trained in the palace's culture to a vizier, the Sultan ensured the vizier's loyalty and alignment with him. Outside the palace, these women were highly respected as palace ladies. The Sultanate of Women and Politics. The most striking period in harem history is undoubtedly the Sultanate of Women. Spanning the 16th and 17th centuries, it began with Hurrem Sultan and continued through Nurbanu, Safai, Kozum, and Turhan Sultan. These women didn't just run the harem, they ran the empire. Hurrem Sultan corresponded with the King of Poland. Safai Sultan exchanged diplomatic letters with Queen Elizabeth I of England, sending gifts, cosmetics, and even carriages. Kozum Sultan, she ruled the state directly during her son's and grandson's reigns as the Grand Valide, becoming one of history's most powerful women. From behind the harem's barred windows, they appointed viziers, made war decisions, and commissioned monumental architecture. The Yeni Mosque in Eminonu or Attic Valide Mosque in Uskadar are tangible testaments to the power these women wielded. Throughout the 6th century history of the Ottoman Empire, few institutions have captured as much fascination or been surrounded by as many myths as the Harem-i Humayun. In Western literature and Orientalist art, the harem is often portrayed as a mystical pleasure house, existing solely to satisfy the Sultan's sexual desires. The historical reality, however, is far more complex. The harem was a critical cog in the machinery of the Ottoman state. The term harem comes from the Arabic root rm, meaning forbidden, inviolable, sacred, and protected. While it could denote the private, family space in Ottoman society, within the palace it signified the Sultan's household, the center of reproduction, and the command hub of the most powerful female political actors in the empire. The harem was not merely a secluded residence for women. It functioned as a parallel institution to the Enderun school, one of the empire's most disciplined educational systems. The concubines brought into the palace were trained not only to become companions of the Sultan, but also to marry state officials from the Kul system, the elite administrative class. In this way, the harem played a central role in reproducing the Ottoman aristocracy, known as the Derusid or House of Felicity. The institution was governed by a strict hierarchy, merit-based promotion, and intricate court protocols, a state within a state. This video aims to explore the Harem-i Humayun not just as a domestic or sexual space, but through its architectural, demographic, administrative, and political dimensions, highlighting the contrast between Western Orientalist fantasies and the realities revealed by Ottoman archival records. From the procurement of concubines, their education within the palace, the rituals surrounding intimate life, to the diplomatic correspondence of the Valide sultans, we will examine the harem's defining role in the history of the Ottoman Empire, the physical structure of the harem and its hierarchies. The Harem-i Humayun possesses an architectural layout that concretely reflects the hierarchy and power relations within it. During the reign of Mehmed the Conqueror, the administrative center of the state was established in Topkapi Palace. But initially, the harem was located in the Old Palace, today's Istanbul University Rectorate building. However, during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the harem was moved to Topkapi Palace due to the influence of Hürrem Sultan and several fires. This relocation marked a turning point in Ottoman history, as the royal family became physically integrated with the center of state power, laying the groundwork for the period known as the Sultanate of Women. The Golden Road and the Corridor of Power. The main artery of the harem in Topkapi Palace is the Altinyol, Golden Road, a stone-paved corridor connecting various sections of the palace. This corridor serves as a passageway between the Kurii quarters, the Valide Sultan's apartments, and the Sultan's private chambers. While legends suggest its name comes from the tradition of the Sultan scattering gold during coronation ceremonies or festivals, its true significance lies in symbolizing the path to the Sultan. The location of apartments along the Golden Road reflected the inhabitants' proximity to the Sultan, and therefore their political influence. Courtyards and secluded areas. The architecture of the harem consists of interconnected courtyards and rooms, each designated for specific groups. Karagala quarters. Located at the outer entrance of the harem, this area housed the eunuch guards and served as the first line of security, separating the harem from the outside world. Kurii quarters. Home to the largest group of Asami, novice, and Kalfa, senior, concubines. This central section was where training and daily routines took place, including dormitories, baths, and laundries. Valide Sultan's apartments. Situated strategically near the Hunker Sofa, these quarters reinforced the Valide Sultan's authority over both her son, the Sultan, and the harem's inhabitants. Some windows overlooked the Golden Horn and parts of the city, while others faced the palace interior, symbolizing control over the entire harem. Hunker Sofa, the largest and most magnificent hall where the Sultan met with members of the harem, celebrated festivals, and held ceremonies. Designed with contributions from master architects such as Mimar Sinan and David Aga, this space embodied the grandeur of the dynasty. Kushain Gate and Kummel Gate. The harem's connection to the outside world was extremely restricted. The main entrance, known as the Arba Gate or Kummel Gate, was guarded 24/7 by eunuchs and other officials. Only the Sultan, princes, doctors, under supervision in emergencies, and eunuchs could enter. Foreign men were strictly prohibited, and the name harem, emphasizing privacy, was realized in practice here. Human resources, from slavery to sultanate, selection and demographics of the concubines. The Ottoman harem system was essentially a female adaptation of the Kul system. Nearly all members of the harem were non-Muslim women brought from outside the empire or captured as prisoners of war. This ensured that the Sultan did not have to form marital alliances with local Turkish aristocratic families, thereby maintaining exclusive loyalty to the royal household. Sources and methods of recruitment. The entry of concubines into the palace evolved over the centuries. War captives, Ganymed in the 15th and 16th centuries. During intense periods of conquest, captives from the Balkans and Central Europe were a primary source. According to the Pensic law, 1/5 of war captives belonged to the state, and the most beautiful, healthy, and talented girls were selected for the palace. Slave markets. Avre Pazarlari as military campaigns slowed. Commercial slavery became prominent. Istanbul's Avre market was where traders sold women from the Caucasus, Crimea, and Africa. Palace agents, Saray Bazarganlari, purchased the most qualified candidates on behalf of the Sultan or the Valide Sultan. Only girls meeting strict physical and intellectual standards were admitted. Gifts and tributes. Vassal states like the Crimean Khanate sent specially trained and beautiful women as tributes, shaping the demographic composition of the harem. Piracy. European women captured by Turkish and Berber pirates in the Mediterranean, e.g., Venetian or French women, could also enter the harem. Historical records indicate that figures like Nurbanu Sultan and Safai Sultan had Venetian origins. The ethnic composition of the harem evolved alongside the empire's political geography. Early period, predominantly Balkan women of Serbian, Bulgarian, Greek, and Albanian origin. Harem Sultan Roxolana hailed from Ukraine/Ruthenia. Middle and late periods, from the 17th century onward, Caucasian women, Circassian, Georgian, Abaza, became dominant due to their beauty and adaptability to palace etiquette. African women, generally from Abyssinia, Ethiopia, Sudan, and the Nile Valley. African women were employed as servants rather than concubines, though some rose to the ranks of Khalfa or USTA. Legal status, concubines and freedom. Women in the harem were legally considered slaves, though this differed significantly from American chattel slavery. Under Islamic law, a concubine with a child by her master, a malwalid, could not be sold and would be freed upon her master's death. In Ottoman practice, palace concubines were typically emancipated after a certain period of service, usually 9 years, given a dowry, and married off, a ceremony known as Sirag Edelmek. Those who became the Sultan's wives effectively left slavery behind and rose to become some of the most powerful women in the empire, as exemplified by Harem Sultan, who was officially freed and married by the Sultan. Education in the harem, the palace as an academy. The harem was not a production center for sexual objects, but rather an educational institution that trained the female elite of the empire. Just as boys in the Enderun school were educated to become state officials, girls in the harem were equipped with palace etiquette, culture, and skills necessary for their future roles. Curriculum and the education process. A girl entering the palace, known as an Asami novice, would first convert to Islam and receive a new name suited to her character or physical attributes, e.g., Dulruba, Gulbahar, Natsakita. Her education covered the following areas: religion and language, reading the Quran, learning prayer surahs, and basic Islamic teachings. Literacy in Turkish was emphasized, making the palace the center of female literacy in this period. Gifted students could also learn Persian and Arabic. Music and the arts. Music was central to harem life. Girls were taught to play instruments such as the ud, canon, tef, and ney, to sing, and to perform raqs dance. Renowned composers like Layla, Saz were products of this system. Handicrafts and household management. Skills such as embroidery, sewing, table setting, and coffee service were taught. These were essential for managing the households of the high-ranking officials they would eventually marry. Adab-i Muazaret, etiquette proper palace protocol. How to behave before the Sultan, how to speak, and showing respect and obedience to elders were key lessons. Graduation and marriage. Not every concubine became the Sultan's wife. Those who did not attract the Sultan's attention or who completed their service period, usually 9 years, were emancipated in a ceremony called Sirag Sikma. Their dowries were arranged by the Sultan or the Valide Sultan. They were provided with a home and were often married to high-ranking bureaucrats or military officers trained in the Enderun system. This system, mirroring the Kull system for men, ensured that the top administrative class of the empire was composed of individuals entirely raised in palace culture and loyalty. These women, upon marriage, were highly respected as Sareli Hanem in their husbands' households, extending palace culture into wider Ottoman society. Daily life, culture, and entertainment. Life in the harem, contrary to popular perception, was not constant entertainment. It was a disciplined routine divided between worship and service. Daily routine. The day began with the morning prayer. This was followed by lessons and rotational service duties, such as cleaning, laundry, and table service. The concubines carried out the tasks of the quarters they were assigned to, Valide Sultan's apartments, Hazaneter quarters, etc. Meals were provided by the palace kitchen, Matbaya Meyer, and the quality of trays and utensils varied according to rank, while the Valide Sultan and the Kadinfendeler dined privately with their attendants. Novices ate collectively in dormitories. Bath culture and hygiene. Cleanliness was a vital part of both Islam and palace culture. The harem baths, for example, the Harem Sultan bath, were not only for washing but also served as spaces for socializing, gossip, and beauty rituals. Henna application, hair care, and perfuming took place here. Entertainment and social life. Despite strict discipline, time was allocated for leisure. On Ramadan nights, holidays, and birth celebrations, Karagas shadow plays, theatrical performances, and musical sessions were organized. Halva gatherings were a staple of winter evenings. Under tight security, concubines were sometimes allowed excursions to palace gardens, hasbahs, or summer pavilions along the Bosphorus, Gaksu, Kajithang. Palace women were fashion icons of the empire. Their clothing and jewelry were emulated by the people of Istanbul. Valide sultans and Hasikis purchased goods from Jewish female merchants known as kira, who were among the few outsiders allowed in the harem. These kiras provided luxury fabrics, jewelry, and cosmetics to the concubines, while also bringing news from the outside world. Sexual life, reproduction policies, and prince education. The primary purpose of the harem was the continuity of the dynasty. Therefore, sexual life was strictly regulated and managed as a system of reproductive policy. Halvet ritual and presentation to the sultan. A concubine's union with the sultan, halvet, was not random. Usually, the Valide sultan or Kisler Agassi selected girls according to the sultan's preferences and presented them. The chosen concubine was bathed, perfumed, and dressed before being escorted along the Altignol to the sultan's chamber. Scenes depicted in Orientalist paintings, where the sultan supposedly chooses by throwing a handkerchief, are historically inaccurate. Entry rituals, such as kissing the floor covering and entering from the foot of the bed, expressed respect for the sultan. Reproduction and contraception. Not every sexual encounter was meant to produce a child. Too many princes meant increased risk of succession conflicts. Contraceptive methods were known and used within the palace. Midwives and female physicians prepared herbal mixtures, honey, acacia, various herbs, used tampons, or employed coitus interruptus, azal. While abortion was generally disapproved of under Islamic law and Ottoman custom, records indicate that it was sometimes secretly practiced in cases of unwanted pregnancy. Pregnancies among concubines of princes unlikely to ascend the throne were especially discouraged. The one mother, one son principle. Until the 16th century, a rule was enforced whereby a concubine could give the sultan only one male child. After the birth of her son, her sexual relationship with the sultan ceased, and she devoted herself entirely to her son's education and safety. When her son was sent to govern a province as a sancakbi, his mother accompanied him and managed his household as his Valide sultan. This rule was intended to prevent a single woman from gaining excessive power over the sultan and to balance influence among princes through their mothers. Hurrem Sultan broke this rule by bearing multiple sons, Mehmed, Selim, Bayezid, Cihangir, and remaining in the capital, paving the way for this sultanate of women. The harem and politics, the sultanate of women and diplomacy. From the mid-16th century to the late 17th century, the Ottoman Empire experienced a period known as the Sultanate of Women, during which Valide sultans and Hasiki sultans held direct influence over state affairs. When sultans ascended the throne at a young age or proved incapable, their mothers acted as Nabi Sultanate regent, effectively governing the empire. Influential figures and their actions. Hurrem Sultan, the first woman to rise from slavery to become a legally wedded consort. She initiated diplomatic correspondence, writing letters and sending gifts to King Sigismund of Poland and to the sister of the Shah of Iran, Nurbanu Sultan. During the reigns of Selim II and Murad III, she pursued a pro-Venetian policy and played a key role in maintaining peace between Venice and the Ottoman Empire. Safai Sultan, as the consort of Murad III and mother of Mehmed III, she corresponded directly with Queen Elizabeth I of England, exchanging diplomatic gifts, cosmetics, jewelry, carriages. In her letters, she positioned herself as the Queen's equal and advocated for English interests at the Ottoman court. Kozum Sultan, she ruled during the reigns of her sons Murad IV and Ibrahim, as well as her grandson Mehmed IV, earning the title of Great Valide Sultan and becoming one of the most powerful women in history. Turhan Sultan, as the mother of Mehmed IV, she emerged victorious in the power struggle against Kozum Sultan, later delegating authority to Kaprala Mehmed Pasha, which helped stabilize the empire. Architectural patronage and charitable works. To legitimize their political power, harem women commissioned grand architectural projects. Notable examples include the Attic Valley complex in Üsküdar, Nurbana Sultan, the Yeni Mosque in Eminönü, Safayi and Turin Sultan, and the Haseki complex, Harem Sultan. These projects demonstrated their presence and authority not only within the palace, but also in public life, reinforcing their status as mothers of the state. Modernization and the end of the harem. In the 19th century, the Ottoman modernization process transformed the harem. Change of residence, the transition from the dark, enclosed spaces of Topkapi Palace to the more westernized, bright, and outward-facing Dolmabahce and Yildiz palaces softened harem life. Abolition of slavery. The official ban on the slave trade in the mid-19th century, though often ignored in practice, made it harder to acquire concubines, gradually replacing the system with paid domestic servants. Cultural transformation. Western influences entered the harem. Piano lessons were introduced, French was taught, and European fashions were followed. In 1909, following the deposition of Abdul Hamid II, the harem gates were opened, and many concubines were returned to their families or freed. With the abolition of the caliphate in 1924 and the exile of the royal family, the imperial harem ceased to exist institutionally. The Ottoman harem was not a hedonistic fantasy as portrayed in the West. It was a highly structured institution with rules, hierarchy, an education system, and political functions. Beyond being a biological center for the dynasty's continuity, it served as a school for the wives of the empire's top administrators, viziers and pashas. Concubines who entered as slaves could emerge as some of the most powerful, charitable, and educated women of the empire. Figures like Hurrem, Kozum, and Turin demonstrate that the harem functioned as the empire's secret cabinet. Understanding this institution is essential for a comprehensive grasp of Ottoman political and social history. In short, friends, the Ottoman harem was not the fantasy world the West imagined, with naked women eating grapes. It was, with all its rules, hierarchy, struggles, and triumphs, the empire's secret cabinet. Girls who entered through those doors as slaves, if they had the intelligence and a bit of luck, could become partners in one of the most powerful empires in the world. The harem was both the home of the Ottoman dynasty and the center of its governance. I hope this video has helped change your perception of the harem a little. Thank you for walking with me through these hidden corridors of history.